The gunshot echoed through the valley like a death knell, announcing the beginning of Lillian Vaughn's nightmare. She stood frozen in the doorway of her modest ranch home, watching her father collapse to the ground while three men on horseback fled into the dusky horizon, their saddlebags bulging with what had once been the family's life savings. Arizona Territory, 1875. The promise of silver had drawn prospectors and opportunists alike to the unforgiving landscape. Lillian's father, Edward Vaughn, had struck a modest vein 6 months prior, enough to sustain their small ranch through the coming winter. Now he lay bleeding in the dirt, his life ebbing away with each labored breath. "Papa, hold on," Lillian begged, kneeling beside him, her calico dress soaking up the blood from his chest wound. At 22, she had already endured the loss of her mother to consumption and her brother to the war. Her father was all she had left, Lily, he rasped, gripping her hand with failing strength. "Find Sheriff Taylor. Tell him it was the Blackwell gang." His final words escaped on a last rattling breath before his eyes fixed on the darkening sky. Tears streamed down Lillian's face as she closed her father's eyes. She knew the Blackwell gang, 3 brothers who had terrorized the territory for years. The eldest, Samuel Blackwell, had once proposed marriage to her, and her rejection had earned his lasting enmity. Now, it seemed he had exacted his revenge in the cruelest way possible. 2 days later, after burying her father behind their small home, Lillian rode into Silverton with grief hardening into resolve. The town's main street bustled with the usual activity: miners heading to saloons, merchants hawking wares, ladies in fine dresses stepping carefully around mud puddles. None of it touched her as she made her way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor looked up from his desk when she entered, his weathered face betraying no emotion. "Miss Vaughn," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Sheriff," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I've come to report my father's murder." The man sighed, leaning back in his creaking chair. "I heard about Ed, real shame." "It was the Blackwell gang," Lillian stated. "They took all our money, the silver earnings." Taylor's expression soured. "Now, Miss Vaughn, that's a mighty serious accusation." "My father named them with his dying breath. The Blackwells were seen playing cards in the Silver Dollar all day yesterday," the sheriff countered. "Got witnesses aplenty." "Then they're lying," Lillian insisted, leaning forward, her hands flat on his desk. "Or the witnesses are." "Sheriff, they killed my father. I saw them riding away." "Did you see their faces?" he challenged. Lillian hesitated. "No, but then you can't be certain." Taylor stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "I'm sorry about your pa, but I can't arrest men based on hearsay, especially not the Blackwells. They've got friends in high places." "So justice doesn't apply to them?" she demanded. "I didn't say that." Taylor's voice hardened. "I said I need evidence." Lillian left the sheriff's office with anger burning in her chest. If the law wouldn't help her, she would find another way to prove the Blackwells' guilt. But first, she needed to secure the ranch. Without her father's income, she had only a matter of time before she would lose everything. For 3 weeks, Lillian struggled to maintain the ranch alone. She sold her mother's silver brooch to purchase feed for the livestock and took in mending to earn a few dollars. Each night, exhaustion claimed her before her head hit the pillow, but it did nothing to ease the nightmares of her father's murder. The rumors began to spread through town that Edward Vaughn had squandered his silver earnings on gambling debts. Lillian confronted the sources only to find them unwilling to speak against the Blackwells, who seemed to have half the town in their pocket. She began to understand that justice would be harder to come by than she had imagined. One evening, as dusk painted the desert in crimson and gold, Lillian spotted a rider approaching her ranch. She grabbed her father's shotgun from beside the door, ready to defend herself if necessary. But as the figure drew closer, she recognized neither man nor mount. The stranger rode a chestnut gelding with a white blaze down its face. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. When he reached the yard, he removed his hat, revealing tousled brown hair and keen blue eyes in a sun-weathered face. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deep but gentle. "Name's Benjamin Reynolds. I'm looking for work." Lillian lowered the shotgun but didn't set it aside. "I'm not hiring, Mr. Reynolds. Can barely feed myself these days." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "I understand. Just passing through and thought I'd ask. Heard in town you might need a hand with the place." "Heard in town," she repeated, suspicious. "Who's talking about my business?" "Folks at the general store said you lost your pa recently." His expression softened with genuine sympathy. "My condolences, Miss Vaughn, Lillian Vaughn." She hesitated, then asked, "You're not from around here?" "No, madam. Been working cattle drives up north, heading to California but need to earn my way there." Lillian studied him, weighing her instincts against caution. There was something straightforward in his manner that put her at ease, but she'd been fooled before. "I can't pay you, Mr. Reynolds. Call me Ben," he suggested. "And I'm not asking for money. Just a roof and meals while I help out. Could be good for both of us for a spell." Lillian considered her situation. The barn needed repairs, the cattle needed tending, and she was one person trying to do the work of three. Still, taking in a stranger carried risks. 1 week, she decided. "You can sleep in the barn. First sign of trouble, you're gone." Ben smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Fair enough, Miss Vaughn." "Lillian," she corrected, returning his gesture of familiarity. "If we're to work together, might as well use first names." "Lillian," he repeated, tipping his hat. "I'll see to my horse and then ask what needs doing most." As Ben led his gelding toward the barn, Lillian wondered if she'd made a mistake. But something told her this wandering cowboy might be exactly what she needed: an extra pair of hands with no ties to Silverton or its politics. Over the next few days, Ben proved himself invaluable. He repaired the leaking roof, mended fences, and tended to the cattle with the easy competence of a man who'd spent his life working ranches. He was quiet but not unfriendly, sharing stories of his travels over dinner but never prying into Lillian's grief. On the 4th evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lillian found herself telling him about her father's murder. The words poured out of her: the Blackwells, the sheriff's dismissal, the town's complicity. "So that's it," she concluded. "No justice, no closure, just rumors destroying my father's good name while his killers walk free." Ben had listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled as her story unfolded. "These Blackwells seem to have the town in their pocket," he observed. "Samuel Blackwell's father owns the bank," Lillian explained. "The other brothers, James and Thomas, they do his dirty work. They've always gotten away with their crimes because no one dares testify against them." "And you're sure it was them?" Ben asked, his tone not doubting but clarifying. "I'm certain. My father named them, and they had motive. Samuel wanted to marry me last year. When I refused, he threatened that I'd regret it." She hugged herself against the cooling evening air. "I never imagined he meant this." Ben was silent for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the horizon. "I've seen men like the Blackwells before," he finally said. "They think their money or their guns make them untouchable, but every man has a weakness." "What's Samuel's?" Lillian asked bitterly. "Besides wounded pride, that's what we need to find out." Ben's voice had hardened, revealing a steely resolve beneath his easygoing manner. "Justice might not come from the sheriff's office, but that doesn't mean it can't be found." "We," Lillian echoed, meeting his gaze. "If you'll have my help," he offered simply. "A man who'd kill over a rejected proposal isn't likely to let things go. You might be in danger too." The thought had crossed her mind, but hearing it spoken aloud sent a chill down her spine. "I can't ask you to get involved in my troubles." "You didn't ask," Ben pointed out with a slight smile. "I'm offering. Besides, I've never much liked bullies." That night, Lillian lay awake longer than usual, considering Ben's offer. There was something comforting about not facing her struggle alone, yet she worried about dragging someone else into her fight. By morning, however, events overtook her deliberations. She woke to the sound of horses approaching not just one or two, but several. Peering through the window, her heart sank at the sight of Samuel Blackwell leading a group of 5 men toward her house. Grabbing her shotgun, she hurried outside to find Ben already standing on the porch, his posture relaxed but alert, a rifle held casually in his hands. "Morning, Miss Vaughn," Samuel called, his fake cordiality not matching the coldness in his eyes. He was a handsome man by conventional standards, with sleek black hair and fine clothes that spoke of wealth. But Lillian had always found something reptilian in his gaze. "Heard you've been spreading some unsavory stories about me and my brothers." "I've told only the truth," Lillian replied, her finger resting near the shotgun's trigger. Samuel's smile tightened. "The truth is your father lost his silver in a card game. Ask anyone in town." "Anyone who's afraid of you, you mean," she challenged. His attention shifted to Ben. "And who might this be?" "Benjamin Reynolds," Ben answered before Lillian could speak. "Just passing through lending a hand." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Convenient timing, Reynolds, but this isn't your fight." "Seems to me when 6 men ride out to intimidate one woman, it becomes any decent man's fight," Ben replied evenly. The tension stretched between them, palpable as a thundercloud. Finally, Samuel broke the silence with a forced laugh. "We're not here for trouble, just to deliver a message. The bank's foreclosing on this property due to your father's unpaid debts. You have 1 week to vacate." "There are no debts," Lillian protested. "My father owned this land outright," Samuel shrugged. "Papers say different. Check with the bank if you don't believe me." As the men turned to leave, Samuel paused. "Oh, and Miss Vaughn, I'd be careful about the company you keep. Drifters tend to bring trouble." He tipped his hat mockingly before following his companions. Once they were out of earshot, Lillian turned to Ben, panic rising in her throat. "They're going to take my home now, too?" "Not if we can help it," Ben assured her. "But we need to move quickly." "Do you have your father's land deed?" She nodded. "In his strongbox." "Good, we should head into town, see a lawyer if there is one." Samuel may own the bank, but forging documents is still illegal, even in Silverton. Lillian stared after the departing riders, determination replacing her fear. "I'm not letting them take my father's land, not without a fight." They rode into Silverton that afternoon, the deed secured in Lillian's saddlebag. The town's only lawyer, a Mr. Pearson, reviewed the document with care, his brow furrowing as he examined it. "This deed is proper and legal," he confirmed. "There's no mortgage or lien against the property that I can see." "Samuel Blackwell claims otherwise," Lillian explained. "Says the bank is foreclosing due to debts." Pearson removed his spectacles, polishing them nervously. "Miss Vaughn, I must caution you. The Blackwells hold considerable influence here." "Are you saying you won't help?" Ben asked, his tone measured but firm. "I'm saying proceeding against them could be professionally unwise for me." The lawyer replaced his glasses. "However, Judge Wilson arrives next week for the circuit court. He's no friend to the Blackwells, has even jailed Thomas once for brawling. He might be sympathetic to your case." "A week gives Samuel time to fabricate more evidence," Lillian pointed out. "True," Pearson conceded. "But it also gives you time to gather witnesses. Your ranch hands suppliers, anyone who might know your father's business dealings." "My father worked alone," Lillian admitted, "and I've been managing by myself since, until Ben arrived." The lawyer's expression grew troubled. "That complicates matters without corroborating testimony." "What about the murder?" Ben interjected. "Surely that takes precedence over property disputes." "Murder allegations require evidence, Mr. Reynolds. Did anyone witness the crime besides Miss Vaughn?" "My father named them with his dying breath," Lillian insisted. "Hearsay," Pearson said regretfully. "Not admissible without supporting evidence." As they left the lawyer's office, Lillian felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on her. "They're going to get away with everything, aren't they? Killing my father, stealing our money, taking our land." "Not yet," Ben determined, guiding her toward the saloon. "Let's see what we can learn about the day your father was killed." The Silver Dollar Saloon was already doing brisk business despite the early hour. Miners, cowboys, and townspeople crowded around tables, drinking and playing cards. Ben led Lillian to the bar where a portly man with impressive mustaches was polishing glasses. "What'll it be?" the barkeep asked. "Information," Ben replied, sliding a silver dollar across the counter. "About the Blackwell brothers." The man's eyes darted around the room before he leaned closer. "Can't help you, friend. Value my life too much." "Just looking to verify they were here 3 weeks ago," Ben pressed. "The day Edward Vaughn was murdered." The barkeep stiffened, finally noticing Lillian. "You're Ed's girl," he whispered. "Miss, you shouldn't be asking these questions, not here." "Please," Lillian implored. "They killed my father and now they're taking our ranch." Something softened in the man's weathered face. "I'm sorry about your pa, good man, Ed." He glanced around again, then spoke barely above a whisper. "The Blackwells weren't here all day like they claimed. Came in late afternoon, made a big show of settling in for cards, bought rounds for the house. Like they wanted everyone to remember they'd been here for hours." "What time exactly?" Ben asked. "Around 4. I remember because I just opened a new barrel." Lillian felt a surge of hope. Her father had been killed just before sundown, around 6. The Blackwells had been establishing an alibi. "Would you testify to that?" she asked. Fear flashed across the barkeep's face. "I can't. Got a family to think about." Before either could respond, the saloon's doors swung open and Thomas and James Blackwell sauntered in. The barkeep immediately moved away, busying himself with customers at the other end of the bar. Thomas, the youngest brother, spotted them first. His hand moved toward his holster as he nudged James, who scowled and altered course to intercept them. "Well, if it isn't the grieving daughter," James sneered, his breath reeking of whiskey despite the early hour. "And her new protector." Ben positioned himself slightly in front of Lillian. "We were just leaving." "Not so fast," Thomas interjected, moving to block their path to the door. "Heard you've been asking questions about us. That's not healthy." Several patrons quietly slipped out of the saloon, sensing trouble. Others moved to the edges of the room, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire but too curious to leave. "All we want is the truth," Lillian stated, meeting James's gaze directly. "About my father's murder and about the fraudulent foreclosure on our ranch." James laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. The truth is your pa lost everything to us fair and square. As for his death, bandits are common in these parts. Sheriff ruled it such." "The sheriff is in your brother's pocket," Lillian accused. Thomas took a threatening step forward, but Ben moved smoothly to intercept him. "Easy now," Ben cautioned. "You really want to start something here?" "Wouldn't be starting anything," Thomas replied, his hand still hovering near his gun. "Be finishing what she started with her wild accusations." The tension in the room thickened, broken only when the sheriff himself pushed through the batwing doors. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking in the standoff. "Just a friendly conversation, Sheriff," James answered, not taking his eyes off Ben. Taylor looked skeptical. "Miss Vaughn, I thought I made myself clear about these accusations." "New evidence has come to light," Ben stated calmly. "Witnesses who can place the Blackwells elsewhere when they claim to be here all day." It was a bluff, but it hit its mark. Thomas's face flushed with anger and James's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Is that so?" the sheriff drawled. "And who might these witnesses be?" Ben met his gaze steadily. "They'll speak to Judge Wilson when he arrives next week. In the meantime, I suggest you investigate the fraudulent documents being prepared at the bank to steal Miss Vaughn's property." The sheriff glanced between the parties, clearly calculating his position. "I don't take kindly to being told how to do my job, stranger." "And I don't take kindly to lawmen who ignore murder to protect the wealthy," Ben countered. A tense silence fell over the saloon. Finally, Taylor adjusted his hat. "Blackwells, I think you boys ought to head home. Miss Vaughn, Mr. Reynolds," Ben supplied. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you do the same. Keep the peace until Judge Wilson arrives, or I'll have all of you in my jail." As they left the saloon, Lillian felt the townspeople's eyes following them, some curious, some sympathetic, most afraid. You think the sheriff will actually investigate?" She asked Ben once they were outside. "No," he admitted. "But I wanted to put them on notice. They know someone's watching now." Over the next few days, Lillian and Ben worked to gather what evidence they could. They visited neighboring ranches, spoke to the general store owner who had supplied Edward Vaughn for years, and even tracked down the doctor who had examined her father's body. Few were willing to testify outright against the Blackwells, but several provided small pieces of information that together painted a damning picture. Edward had indeed sold silver recently, but had deposited the money in a bank in Tucson, not Silverton, to keep it from Samuel's father. He had mentioned threats from the Blackwells to several people. And perhaps most crucially, a hunter had seen 3 riders matching the Blackwell brothers' descriptions heading toward the Vaughn ranch on the day of the murder. As the day of Judge Wilson's arrival approached, tension in Silverton mounted. Samuel Blackwell made a point of riding past Lillian's ranch daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with his brothers or hired men. It was clearly meant to intimidate, but with Ben's steady presence, Lillian found her resolve strengthening rather than weakening. On the evening before the judge was due, Ben found Lillian sitting on the porch steps, staring at the sunset. He settled beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked gently. She nodded. "What if it's not enough? What if the judge believes them over us?" "Then we'll find another way," Ben assured her. "I won't leave you to face this alone, Lillian." She turned to him, studying his profile in the fading light. Over the past weeks, his presence had become a comfort she hadn't expected. "Why are you doing this, Ben? You could have moved on days ago. This isn't your fight." He was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "Maybe it wasn't at first," he admitted, "but it is now." "Why?" she pressed. Ben turned to meet her gaze. "Because I've come to care for you, Lillian, more than I expected to." The confession hung between them, as delicate and precious as a hummingbird. Lillian felt her heart quicken, awareness of their proximity suddenly acute. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past weeks." His hand found hers, warm and calloused from honest work. For a moment, the world beyond the ranch, the Blackwells, the trial, the uncertain future fell away. There was only this, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing day. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the gravity of what lay ahead. Lillian dressed in her best dress, a modest blue calico that had been her mother's. Ben donned a clean shirt and vest, looking more the respectable rancher than the drifter who had ridden in weeks before. They arrived in town to find it unusually crowded. Judge Wilson's arrival was always an event in small communities like Silverton, where the circuit court provided the only real justice for hundreds of miles. The town hall had been converted into a makeshift courtroom, with benches arranged in rows and a table set up at the front for the judge. Sheriff Taylor stood at the entrance, looking uncomfortable in a freshly pressed uniform. He nodded curtly as Lillian and Ben approached. "Miss Vaughn, Mr. Reynolds, the judge will hear your case after lunch." Inside, Lillian was surprised to see how many townspeople had gathered. Some nodded to her sympathetically, others averted their eyes. The Blackwells sat in the front row, Samuel in the center, flanked by his brothers and their father, a stern-faced man whose fortune had been built on the backs of desperate miners. The morning cases proceeded slowly: property disputes, a cattle rustling charge, a divorce petition. Throughout it all, Lillian felt Samuel's gaze burning into her, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of appearing intimidated. After a brief lunch recess, Judge Wilson, a tall, spare man with penetrating eyes and a shock of white hair, called their case. Vaughn versus Blackwell, regarding disputed property ownership and allegations of murder. Step forward. Lillian approached the judge's table, Ben at her side. Samuel and his father did the same, their lawyer, a slick-looking man from Tucson, hovering beside them. "Your Honor," the Blackwell lawyer began, "this is a simple case of a daughter unwilling to accept her father's financial mismanagement." Edward Vaughn lost significant sums to my clients in legal gambling and subsequently defaulted on loans extended by Silverton Bank. The deed has been transferred accordingly." Judge Wilson turned to Lillian. "Miss Vaughn, your response." Taking a deep breath, Lillian recounted everything her father's silver find, his deposit in Tucson rather than Silverton Bank, the murder, and the subsequent attempts to steal her property. As she described finding her father dying, tears welled in her eyes despite her best efforts to remain composed. From the Blackwell side came a derisive snort, followed by whispered laughter. Samuel leaned toward his brothers, whispering something that made them smirk. Judge Wilson's gaze hardened. "I will have order and respect in this court," he warned. "Continue, Miss Vaughn," but the moment had shaken her. Tears now flowed freely down her cheeks as she struggled to maintain her composure. The Blackwell's lawyer seized upon this. "Your Honor, clearly Miss Vaughn is distressed and confused. Her wild accusations are the product of grief, not fact. We have multiple witnesses who can attest to the Blackwell brothers' presence in town during the alleged murder." More snickering from the Blackwell side. Lillian wiped at her tears, humiliation burning through her grief. Ben stepped forward then, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, if I may," Judge Wilson nodded. "You are Benjamin Reynolds, Your Honor. I've been helping Miss Vaughn since shortly after her father's death." Ben's gaze swept the courtroom, landing finally on Samuel Blackwell. "These men may mock her tears, but I've witnessed her courage these past weeks. She's faced threats, intimidation, and lies with more dignity than the men who would steal her birthright." He turned back to the judge. "We have evidence that the Blackwells established a false alibi on the day of the murder. We have confirmation from the bank in Tucson that Edward Vaughn deposited his silver earnings there, not lost them gambling. And we have this." He produced a letter from his vest pocket. "Written by Edward Vaughn a week before his death, expressing fear that Samuel Blackwell would seek revenge for his daughter's rejection." The judge accepted the letter, reading it carefully before looking up. "This is compelling, Mr. Reynolds, but you understand it's still largely circumstantial without direct witnesses to the murder." "Yes, Your Honor," Ben acknowledged. "But justice isn't served by allowing powerful men to silence those who would speak against them through fear." He gestured toward the townspeople. "Many here know the truth but are afraid to stand against the Blackwells." Samuel rose, his face contorted with rage. "This is slander. My family built this town. Who are you to come here and accuse us based on a woman's hysteria and a forged letter?" "Sit down, Mr. Blackwell," the judge ordered sharply, but Samuel was beyond listening. "I won't be lectured by some drifter and a woman who should be grateful I ever offered for her hand." A murmur ran through the crowd at this admission of connection between Samuel and Lillian, a connection he had previously denied. "The lady's upset," James Blackwell added with a cruel smile. "Can't expect a woman to understand business or law, best send her home to compose herself." Fresh tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks, not of sadness now but of frustration and anger. Yet each tear seemed only to amuse the Blackwells more, their mockery becoming more open as the courtroom's tension increased. It was then that Ben did something unexpected. He moved to stand directly beside Lillian, his shoulder touching hers in a gesture of unmistakable solidarity. "They may mock her tears at this trial," Ben declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "but I'll stand till she's heard. And I reckon there are others here who know the truth and might find their courage now." A profound silence fell over the courtroom. Then, slowly, the barkeep from the Silver Dollar rose from his seat. "I'll speak, Your Honor," he said, his voice wavering but determined. "The Blackwells weren't in my saloon all day like they claimed, came in late afternoon, making a show of it. Another man stood the hunter who had seen riders near the Vaughn ranch. I saw them, Judge, 3 riders matching their description, heading toward Vaughn's place around sundown." One by one, people rose the general store owner who had heard Samuel threaten Edward. a miner who had seen the brothers return to town with bulging saddlebags the night of the murder, even Sheriff Taylor's deputy, who admitted his boss had ordered him to ignore evidence pointing to the Blackwells. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of guilt. Throughout it all, Ben remained beside Lillian, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Judge Wilson listened to each witness, his expression growing grimmer with every new revelation. When the last had spoken, he turned to the Blackwells, whose arrogance had been replaced by barely concealed panic. In light of the evidence presented, I am ordering the immediate arrest of Samuel James and Thomas Blackwell on suspicion of the murder of Edward Vaughn, the judge announced. Furthermore, I am invalidating any transfer of property from the Vaughn estate and will be recommending an investigation into the practices of Silverton Bank. Sheriff Taylor moved reluctantly to carry out the arrests, but the judge stopped him with a raised hand. I think my bailiffs will handle this matter, Sheriff. You'll be answering some questions yourself about obstruction of justice. As the Blackwells were led away in handcuffs, their protests falling on deaf ears, Lillian turned to Ben. "You did it," she whispered, fresh tears of relief this time welling in her eyes. "You stood by me when no one else would." Ben shook his head, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "We did it. Your courage inspired others to find theirs. I just reminded them what was right." Outside the town hall, the crowd dispersed slowly, many stopping to offer Lillian their belated condolences or apologies for not speaking sooner. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows down Silverton's Main Street, Ben and Lillian found themselves alone at last, walking toward their horses. "What will you do now?" Lillian asked, suddenly fearful that with justice served, Ben would continue his journey to California. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "That depends entirely on you, Lillian Vaughn. On me. I came to your ranch looking for temporary work on my way west," he explained. "But I found something I wasn't looking for: a woman of extraordinary strength and beauty, a place that feels more like home than anywhere I've been, and feelings I never expected to discover." Lillian's heart quickened as Ben continued, his blue eyes holding hers steadily. "I don't have much to offer beyond my hands, my heart, and a promise to stand beside you always, not just in courtrooms. If that's enough, if I'm enough, I'd like to stay." "It's more than enough," Lillian whispered, stepping closer. "These past weeks, despite everything, you've brought light back into my life. I don't want to lose that or you." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the town in gold, Ben drew her into his arms, sealing their future with a kiss that promised everything words could not express. In that moment, Lillian knew that though she had lost much, she had found something precious beyond measure: a love born in adversity, tempered by justice, and destined to flourish in the wild frontier they both called home. 1 year later, the Vaughn Reynolds ranch stood transformed. New fences enclosed expanded pastures, a fresh coat of paint brightened the house, and the sound of laughter had returned to rooms once shrouded in grief. The silver mine continued to produce modestly but steadily, providing security for the future that Lillian and Ben were building together. Their wedding, held the previous spring beneath the old oak tree where Edward Vaughn was buried, had drawn the entire town of Silverton, a community slowly healing from the Blackwell's long shadow. Judge Wilson had returned to perform the ceremony himself, taking particular pleasure in uniting the couple whose courage had brought justice to his circuit. The Blackwell brothers now served their sentences in the territorial prison, their father's bank sold to outside investors who operated with surprising honesty. Sheriff Taylor had been replaced by his former deputy, a young man determined to uphold the law equally for all. On their first anniversary, Ben surprised Lillian with a small wooden cradle lovingly crafted by his own hands. "For the future," he explained, watching her face light up with joy. As they stood together on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar hues of gold and crimson, Lillian leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Stopping here instead of continuing to California?" Ben's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a single moment," he assured her. "Some men spend their whole lives searching for purpose. I found mine the day I rode up to your ranch standing for what's right, building something that matters, loving someone worth fighting for." Lillian smiled, thinking of how far they had come from those dark days after her father's death. "And to think it all began because you offered to help a stubborn woman who pointed a shotgun at you." "Best decision I ever made," Ben chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I'm grateful you've learned to welcome visitors more warmly these days." Their laughter mingled in the twilight air, a testament to the love and life they had forged together in this harsh but beautiful land. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western horizon, a future built on justice, courage, and the unwavering commitment to stand together through whatever trials might come.